Genesis 1:31 is the end of the creation account. After each stage or day, God reviewed what he had done and said about each that they were good. At the end of the last stage or day 6, he looked over all that was created and said it was very good. Proverbs 8 verses 22 to 36 says that God established what wisdom is before creation. In other words, wisdom is integrated into the design of creation. It's good to understand why God looked over all the components of creation and declared it is very good. Note that our science page shows how science and the Bible support each other, not conflict, and you can refer to that later on if you want. So, what is the big picture of what God is doing? In order to understand why the components of creation are good, we need to remember what the big picture is of what God is doing so we can understand how the components meet that purpose. There are more details on our website, but here's a summary reminder. Remember that all this was part of a good plan, and you will see that at the end. So, in eternity past, God needed to decide whether to give us free will or design us so that we can do nothing wrong. While we can understand love when we do nothing wrong, you understand love more when you mess up and see the hand of someone reaching out to lift you up. That becomes even more true when you see that person is showing you unconditional love over time. That may include rewards and consequences, but you learn to see that they're all in the context of growing your maturity. In eternity past, God gave the angels free will, and a third of them rejected his wisdom and truths. So, God created this world where people can use their free will. We look at this life and think that things should be much better if God is both loving and powerful. But God sees this world as a blink of an eye part of our eternal life, where we get to see what happens when we do things our way, as one third of the angels wanted. When we look around at this world and all the strife, it's clear that our ways don't work. Those that are wise will take an honest look and will understand that God's ways really are better. They will find that God, like a loving and wise parent, is not determining his love for us based on basically being a good person. Instead, he's showing unconditional love for those that recognize he really is truly loving and wise. So, eternity future in heaven will therefore only have those that do recognize his love and wisdom. It will be an eternity with him and others in fully wholesome relationships in a place far more beautiful than here. That will be true because we have learned to trust his counsel instead of our own. While here, we should be learning that it really is better to give than to receive, which is the second greatest commandment, and that God really is a wise and loving Father that we should trust, the first and greatest commandment. So, the very good plan with the good components that make it effective. Creation has all the components to support a very good plan. If a loving and wise parent decides to have a child, they expect to mostly give the child free will and counsel along the way. They don't expect the child to be perfect and do nothing wrong, but to mature along the way through both good and bad decisions and listening to their counsel. The goal is to nurture the child into a mature adult so that they have a better chance at a purposeful and rewarding life. That's what God is doing with us in the blink of an eye time on earth. A place where we, like the child, think we know better than our loving and wise Father what yields a purposeful and rewarding life. Our 80 plus or minus years here is less than a blink of an eye in our eternal lives, with a purpose of learning our ways versus God's ways. And yes, there are plenty of Christians that are getting it wrong, and that's why we look at what God says rather than what people say. So, here are a few of the components in creation that help us understand. The parent-child relationship is one of them. Not everyone has a good example of that, but a truly loving and wise parent is maturing their children for much more healthy, full life, even though the child often seeks immediate and self-focused gratification. The wise and loving parents are teaching them relational principles, physical health principles, financial principles, etc. They use rewards and consequences in a context of unconditional love. Another component in our design is lifelong committed relationships. We have the best friend, family, marriage, and other experiences when we find people not only have common values, but values that understand it is better to give than to receive. And if we commit to lifelong relationships, we learn to work through problems rather than run from them. That is when relationships with a foundation of unconditional love are the most fulfilling relationships. A third component in our design is it's better to give than to receive. Although that one's hard to understand until you actually do it, it really is more rewarding and fulfilling to serve others than to serve self. So, God has a loving and wise plan with all the components to make it happen. Thanks for listening.